Imagine a young pregnant woman being cast out into the cold night with nothing but the clothes on her back. No home, no protection, no one to turn to. It sounds like the beginning of a nightmare. Yet this was the reality Emily Carter faced in the rugged hinterlands of Texas in 1847. Before her world collapsed, Emily had believed she was blessed. A modest but loving home, a hard-working husband, and the quiet joy of carrying their first child. But in a society where a landowner's word outweighed any law, and a widow's fate often depended on the mercy of those around her, safety was fragile, and Emily would soon discover just how quickly it could vanish. Emily had built a peaceful life with Thomas Carter, the gentle youngest son of a well-known ranching family. Their small cabin behind the family homestead wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with warmth and tenderness. Thomas treated Emily as an equal partner, rare for the era, always respectful, always kind, always dreaming aloud about the home they would someday build far from the harsh authority of the Carter family's main house. But that dream never sat well with Margaret Carter, Thomas's iron-willed sister-in-law and wife of Samuel, the family's eldest son and heir. Margaret had a way of turning her bitterness into a weapon. And from the moment Emily entered the family, she seemed determined to make her feel unwelcome. Day after day, Margaret's barbed comments struck Emily like invisible blows, criticizing her cooking, belittling her quiet nature, insinuating she wasn't worthy of Thomas, and whispering that her failure to conceive early in marriage was a sign of inadequacy. Emily endured it all in silence, relying on Thomas's steady affection to soothe the wounds his family didn't bother hiding. Thomas noticed her suffering and often took her along to the fields just to keep her away from Margaret's cold gaze. In the evenings, he told her funny stories as they sat by the lantern light, both imagining a better future, one where Margaret's shadows no longer stretched across their lives. But fate had its own plans. One June morning, Thomas left as usual to check the cattle fences, and moments later, Emily heard frantic shouting. When she rushed outside, she found Samuel and two ranch hands carrying Thomas's motionless body. No one knew what had happened. An accident, a sudden illness, or, as people like to say when answers were scarce, God's will. Emily fell to her knees in disbelief. The man who had been her protector, her confidant, her sole source of comfort in a hostile household, was gone. Worse still, Emily was 6 months pregnant, a fact only Thomas had known. Now widowed, vulnerable, and surrounded by people who never wanted her there. She faced a world that suddenly felt colder, sharper, and unimaginably dangerous. And as Margaret's true intentions emerged, Emily would soon learn that losing her husband was only the beginning of the storm about to unravel her life. The days following Thomas's sudden death passed in a blur, as if Emily were drifting through someone else's nightmare. The burial was swift. Texas summers allowed no delay, and she stood alone by the fresh mound of earth, her hands resting protectively over the small swell of her belly. Thomas had been the only person who truly cared for her in the Carter household, the only shield she had against Margaret's cold hostility. Now, with him gone, the air around her felt heavier, the walls of the family ranch colder, and every whispered glance from the ranch hands more piercing than before. Margaret didn't hide her disdain. If anything, Thomas's death seemed to liberate her cruelty. She passed Emily in the halls with a look that made it clear she no longer considered her family. Samuel avoided Emily's eyes entirely. And though Emily sensed something deeply wrong in the way both of them behaved, tight whispers behind closed doors, papers quickly tucked away whenever she entered a room, she was too engulfed in grief to grasp the danger forming around her. It didn't take long for the storm to break. One late afternoon, just a week after Thomas had been laid to rest, Emily sat quietly at the small cabin she had once shared with her husband. She was mending one of Thomas's old shirts when Margaret appeared in the doorway, Samuel looming behind her like a shadow. The sharpness in Margaret's expression made Emily stand abruptly. "You need to leave?" Margaret said flatly, as if stating a simple fact rather than upending a woman's life. Emily blinked. "Leave? But this is my home. Thomas would never—" "Thomas is gone," Margaret snapped. "And you were only here because of him. We're not responsible for feeding another mouth, especially not a widow who brings bad luck on this family." Emily felt the words slice through her. "Bad luck? What are you talking about?" Margaret folded her arms, her lip curling. "Ever since you arrived, things have gone wrong. And now Thomas is dead. You expect us to care for you and whatever burden you're carrying? Absolutely not." Emily's breath caught. "I'm carrying Thomas's child," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your nephew." For a moment, Margaret's expression shifted. Something sharp and calculating flickered in her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "That's not my concern," she said coldly. "You leave by sundown tomorrow, and you take nothing that belongs to the Carter family. Not a blanket, not a tool, not a single crumb of food." Samuel finally spoke, though his voice wavered with guilt. "Perhaps you can go to the church in town, or find some distant relative." "I have no one," Emily said, her voice cracking. "My parents are gone. I have no brothers, no cousins. Thomas was all I had." Margaret's reply cut like ice. "Then pray someone else takes pity on you." And with that, she turned and walked away, her boots thudding on the porch boards like the toll of a final sentence. The next morning, Emily sought help in town. She begged the pastor for shelter, but the church was overwhelmed, already housing several orphans. Neighbors who had once smiled politely now lowered their eyes, unwilling to challenge the powerful Carter family. Door after door closed in her face, until the setting sun forced her back to the ranch one last time. Margaret stood waiting with 2 hired men. "It's time," she said. Emily gathered the few clothes she was allowed to keep, tying them into a faded cloth bundle. As she stepped off the porch, Margaret didn't offer a word of sympathy, not even a backward glance. She simply closed the ranch gate behind Emily with a hard metallic clang that echoed across the empty fields. An ending, sharp and merciless. The wind picked up as darkness settled over the Texas plains. Alone on the dusty road, 6 months pregnant and exhausted, Emily clutched her bundle and took a step forward. Because standing still meant giving up entirely. But the world ahead was nothing but shadows. Shadows she had never imagined she would face without Thomas by her side. She didn't yet know that the night would bring a storm, or that somewhere deep in the woods a faint glimmer of light would appear through the rain. An unexpected beacon that would change night crept over the Texas plains faster than Emily expected, as if the sky itself wished to swallow her whole. The path in front of her stretched endlessly through the fields, a thin ribbon of dirt fading into darkness. By now her legs trembled from exhaustion, her back ached under the weight of her pregnancy, and every breath felt heavy. But she had no choice. There was no ranch, no family, no shelter left to turn back to. The Carter gate had closed on her life like a steel trap. The wind sharpened as the last traces of daylight vanished. Soon, distant thunder rumbled across the land, crawling closer with each minute. Emily paused, pressing a hand to her belly as her unborn child shifted restlessly. "I know," she whispered. "I'm scared too." She tried to keep walking, but the dust beneath her feet had turned to soft mud. The air smelled of rain and wild earth. thick and suffocating. When the storm finally broke, it did so with a fury that felt almost personal. Sheets of rain crashed down in an instant, drenching her within seconds. Her dress clung painfully to her skin, her hair plastered against her cheeks, and the small bundle she carried grew heavier with each drop. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the twisted silhouettes of trees as though the world were shattering around her. Emily stumbled, nearly falling to her knees. She reached instinctively for her belly, sheltering the child who had done nothing to deserve this cruelty. She had survived Margaret's coldness. She had survived the heartbreak of losing Thomas. But this violent storm in the middle of nowhere, felt like the final blow meant to break her entirely. Desperation clawed at her throat. She scanned the darkness for anything, any shape, any sign of human life. But the world was nothing more than shadows and the roar of rain. Her boots sank into the mud as she dragged herself forward, gripping the trunks of trees for balance. The forest thickened around her, swallowing the narrow path. The branches overhead formed a canopy that blocked even the silver flicker of lightning. Emily leaned against a massive oak, trembling from cold and fear. She couldn't stay here. If the storm didn't kill her, the cold would. But she couldn't walk much farther either. That was when she saw it. A flicker, faint, almost unreal. At first she thought it was her imagination, a trick of lightning or exhaustion. But no. There it was again, a warm, golden glow pulsing softly between the trees, like the heartbeat of some distant hope. Emily pushed herself upright, her heart pounding. No rancher lived this far into the woods. No homestead stood in this direction. And yet, a light burned. Clutching her soaked bundle, she forced her feet to move. Every step felt like trudging through quicksand, but the glow grew brighter as she approached. Rain blurred her vision, but slowly a shape emerged. A small wooden structure leaning slightly to one side with a sagging roof and cracked walls. An abandoned cabin, or so it should have been. But through the slats of a boarded-up window shone the unmistakable glow of a lit lantern. Emily hesitated. Fear whispered that entering could be dangerous. But the cold, creeping deeper into her bones, told her she wouldn't survive another hour outside. Gathering what strength she had left, she pushed the door. It groaned loudly, resisting for a moment before giving way. Inside, the air was still, warm, and impossibly clean. A lantern flickered atop a rough wooden table. Beside it lay a neatly folded wool blanket, dry and fresh as if washed that morning. In the corner, stacked carefully, was a pile of cut firewood, uniform, dry, ready to use. Emily froze. Someone had prepared this place recently. But there was no one there now. No footprints on the dirt floor, no sound except her own soaked breathing. Tears blurred her eyes, not of fear, but of overwhelming relief. Whoever had lit the lantern, whoever had left the blanket, had done so for someone in need. And right now, no one in this world needed it more than she did. With trembling hands, she wrapped herself in the blanket, sinking to the floor as warmth seeped slowly back into her skin. The storm raged outside, wind howling like a grieving spirit. But inside the cabin, under the gentle lantern glow, Emily finally felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Safety. As she drifted into sleep, the last thought that passed through her mind was a fragile one, barely formed. Someone knew she was out here. Someone had lit a light for her, and that someone would soon change the entire course of her life. The course of her life forever. Morning light filtered gently through the cracks of the cabin walls, painting soft gold lines across the dirt floor. Emily stirred beneath the wool blanket, her body still heavy with exhaustion, but no longer shaking from cold. For the first time since Thomas's death, she had slept without fear. The storm had passed, yet an odd feeling remained, lingering like the faint trace of a dream she couldn't quite recall. Something had brought her here. Something, or someone. When she stepped toward the door, intending to breathe in the fresh morning air, she froze. Sitting neatly on the cabin's doorstep was a woven basket filled with 3 warm rolls of bread, 2 fresh eggs, and a small jar of creamy butter. The bread was still steaming. Whoever had brought it had done so moments before dawn. Emily looked around the clearing, expecting to see footprints or movement among the trees. But the forest was silent, serene even. Her heart thudded in her chest. She wasn't alone out here, yet no one wanted to be seen. For the next several days, the pattern repeated. Each morning she awoke to new provisions: fruit, dried meat, a bar of soap, even a wooden comb. Every item was carefully placed, clean, intentionally chosen. Someone who watched from the shadows, was caring for her. And though the idea should have frightened her, it didn't. It felt gentle. It felt protective. Still, Emily needed to see the face behind this kindness. One night, long after the fire had burned low, she forced herself to stay awake, sitting quietly near the window with only the faint lantern glow to keep her company. The forest outside hummed with nighttime sounds, crickets, distant owls, the occasional rustle of leaves. But as the hours crawled by, her eyelids grew heavier. Just when sleep threatened to claim her, she heard it. Footsteps. Soft, careful, approaching the cabin door. Emily held her breath and leaned toward the window slats. In the silvery wash of moonlight stood a tall figure, broad shoulders, weathered boots, and hair tied back at his neck. He held a basket in both hands, lowering it gently onto the doorstep. When he hesitated, lingering there as though debating whether to knock, Emily acted on instinct. She pushed open the door. "Wait." The man spun around, startled. His face, illuminated by moonlight, was rugged and lined with years of quiet sorrow. His dark, deep-set eyes widened as they met hers. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. 2 strangers bound by circumstances neither could yet name. Finally, Emily found her voice. "Why are you helping me?" The man exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had carried far too long. "I saw what happened," he said, his voice low and rough from disuse. "The night they forced you out." Emily's heart lurched. You saw that?" He nodded. "I was returning from town, passed near the Carter ranch when they threw you out with nothing. You were alone, carrying a child, and walking into a storm. I followed at a distance to make sure you weren't harmed." His gaze shifted toward the cabin. "When the rain started, I lit the lantern here so you'd find it. This cabin sits on my land. It hasn't been used in years, but it's safe." Emily swallowed hard. "You don't even know me?" The man hesitated before answering, his voice dropping to a strained whisper. "You don't need to know a person to recognize injustice." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken truths. Emily sensed something broken in him, something as bruised as her own spirit. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Michael Hayes," he replied. "I have a ranch 2 miles from here. I live alone." Emily nodded, then spoke the truth she hadn't voiced aloud since Thomas died. "Thank you. You saved my life. You saved my baby's life." For the first time, Michael's expression softened. I only did what I wish someone had done for my family. That caught Emily by surprise. Your family? A shadow crossed Michael's face, the kind born from grief, carved deep into the soul. My wife and son. They passed more than 10 years ago. Fever hit our settlement hard. I couldn't save them. Emotion tightened his voice. Since then, I've lived with ghosts more than people. Emily felt tears burn her eyes, not from pity, but from the quiet strength it took to live after such loss. I'm sorry, she whispered. Michael nodded, swallowing back the ache. When I saw you out there, it felt like maybe I could do something right again, something that mattered. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth, wrapping the clearing in a fragile peace. Emily looked at the man who had stepped out of his solitude to help her, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. Would you come inside? She asked softly. Michael hesitated, then stepped toward her. Not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as someone who, like her, knew what it was to be lost, and what it meant to find a glimmer of light in the darkness. From that night onward, something shifted, so subtly at first that neither Emily nor Michael fully recognized it. What had begun as anonymous acts of kindness slowly evolved into a rhythm of shared presence. Michael still arrived early each morning with fresh food or supplies, but now he no longer left them on the doorstep. He knocked softly, waited for her answer, then stepped inside with a reserved smile that carried more warmth than any fire in the small stone hearth. Emily, once hesitant and guarded, began to look forward to those moments, the quiet sound of his boots approaching in the dawn light, the way he always paused before entering as though asking permission, and the gentle questions he asked about how she slept or whether the baby had been active. His voice was unpolished, his manner stiff at times, but beneath the rough edges lived a tenderness she never expected from a man who had spent a decade in self-imposed isolation. As the days turned into weeks, Michael found small ways to make the cabin safer for her. He patched holes in the roof where rain still seeped in, reinforced the door with new hinges, and built a simple wooden shelf for her few belongings. When Emily protested that she didn't want him doing so much, he answered simply, "You shouldn't have to face the world alone." It was a sentence she had once said to Thomas, long ago. Hearing it again, spoken in Michael's low, steady voice, felt like a thread stitching together a wound she hadn't realized was still open. In return, Emily softened the cabin with little pieces of herself. Folded linens, the scent of warm bread when she dared to cook, and the gentle humming of lullabies her mother once sang. When Michael stopped by in the afternoons, she offered tea or shared small stories of her childhood. He listened more than he spoke. But when he did share something, it came from a place of deep trust. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the slats and painted their faces with warm gold, Emily heard Michael laughing, truly laughing, for the first time. She had been telling him about Thomas's clumsy attempts at building a chicken coop and how the hens constantly escaped through the crooked boards. Michael's smile stretched slowly, as though unused muscles were relearning the motion. "Sounds like he meant well," he said. "He did," Emily replied softly. "Everything he did was with love." A silence followed, not uncomfortable but reflective. Emily laid a hand on her swelling belly and added, "But love isn't something that happens only once in a lifetime. Sometimes life gives you 2 chances." Michael's eyes flicked to hers, startled, not by boldness, but by the gentle truth in her tone. He didn't answer, but the warmth in his expression remained long after he left that evening. Despite the growing peace between them, the world beyond the woods still held danger. Emily often felt the weight of Margaret's cruelty lingering like a shadow at her back. Sometimes she startled awake at night, certain she heard footsteps or whispered voices outside. Michael sensed the tension and began staying longer, sitting on the step outside the cabin after sundown, keeping watch until she drifted into sleep. When Emily asked why he did it, he shrugged. "You sleep easier when someone's near," he said. "And I sleep easier knowing you're safe." As her due date drew closer, Michael prepared the old nursery furniture he had once stored away, the cradle he built for his son, the tiny clothes his wife had sewn by hand. When he brought them to the cabin, he apologized, almost embarrassed. "They're old," he murmured, "but if you'd like them." Before he could finish, Emily touched his arm. "These were made with love. That's more than enough." Her voice trembled with sincerity, and Michael looked away to hide the emotion gathering in his eyes. Their connection deepened through small gestures. Emily placing her hand over his when the baby kicked, Michael brushing a stray curl from her face when she nearly tripped on uneven ground, the two of them sharing quiet meals at the small wooden table he'd repaired. It wasn't a romance of breathless declarations. It was something slower, steadier, born from shared wounds and cautious hope. Each day, the bond between them grew stronger. Emily no longer felt abandoned by the world. She felt held, protected, seen. And Michael, who had spent years believing his heart had died with his family, began to feel its slow and steady revival. The cabin that had once been a forgotten ruin was becoming a home again, not because of its walls, but because two broken people had found shelter in each other. Neither of them yet understood how soon that fragile peace would be tested, nor how fiercely they would fight to keep it. The peaceful rhythm Emily and Michael had begun to build was shattered one sweltering afternoon in late November. Emily had just finished sweeping the cabin floor when she heard something unusual. Voices, harsh, raised, angry voices, cutting through the quiet woods like knives. Her heart lurched. This part of the forest was isolated. No travelers wandered here, and the only people who would seek her out carried the kind of malice she had hoped never to face again. She stepped cautiously to the window, peering through the wooden slats. Her breath froze. Margaret. Margaret Carter marched up the narrow trail with Samuel close behind, followed by two large men whose expressions were hard as stone. Emily's stomach twisted. How had Margaret found her? Why now, when she finally felt safe? A surge of fear rippled through her, but Emily forced herself to stand tall. Running was impossible, not in her condition, and she refused to greet the woman who ruined her life with anything less than dignity. She pushed open the cabin door and stepped onto the small front clearing, cradling her belly protectively. Margaret stopped just a few paces away, her face twisted with fury. Well, Margaret spat, her voice thick with venom. "So this is where you've been hiding, living in this filthy little shack like some woodland stray." "I'm not hiding," Emily replied, though her voice trembled. "I've only been trying to survive." "Survive?" Margaret let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You've done more than survive. You've been spreading lies about me all over the county, claiming I threw you out unfairly, claiming I stole what belonged to you." "I haven't spoken to anyone," Emily said quickly. "I haven't left these woods." "Liar!" Margaret snapped, stepping closer. Her eyes burned with a dangerous, feverish light. "Someone has been talking, and you're the only one with reason to smear my name." "I haven't," Emily insisted, her throat tight. "Please, Margaret, I only want peace." Margaret's lips curled. Peace? You'll have none. Not after the disgrace you've brought on our family. And now I find out you've been living with a man. Emily felt her breath stutter. It's not like that. Oh, I'm sure, Margaret said mockingly. A widow pregnant with a child we can't even prove belongs to Thomas, shacked up with some recluse. People are already whispering. Rage flared behind Emily's fear. How dare you? My child is Thomas's. You know that. Do I? Margaret taunted. There was always something off about you. Too quiet, too secretive. Who's to say you didn't? Enough. The voice struck like thunder. Everyone turned. Michael stepped into the clearing with two neighboring ranchers beside him, men known and respected in the area. His expression was carved from stone, his eyes sharp and unwavering. And in his hands rested a rifle, not raised, not threatening, but visible enough to remind every man present that Michael Hayes was not someone to provoke lightly. Margaret recoiled a step, but tried to recover her bravado. You have no right to interfere. This is family business. This land is mine, Michael said coldly. And Emily is under my protection. You have no right to be here. Samuel shifted nervously. The two hired men stepped back. Margaret, however, wasn't finished. A woman of no reputation, she hissed. A man living alone in the woods. You expect anyone to believe? Michael cut her off, reaching into his coat pocket. What I expect, he said, is for the truth to be known. He pulled out an envelope sealed with old wax and held it up for everyone to see. This, he said, was written by Thomas and given to me 2 weeks before his death. Margaret's face went ash gray. Michael continued, voice ringing through the clearing. In this letter, Thomas explains everything you've been doing, forging debts in his name, creating false documents to claim he owed money he never owed, planning to drive Emily out and take full control of the ranch. That's a lie, Margaret screamed, but her voice cracked with panic. 2 men standing here witnessed Thomas giving me the letter, Michael said, nodding to the ranchers behind him, and they're prepared to testify before the judge. Samuel's face crumpled. Margaret, is this true? Margaret whipped toward him, fury and desperation twisting her features. You spineless fool! Don't you dare turn on me! But it was too late. Her mask had slipped. Her schemes, her cruelty, her greed, they were exposed in the open air of the Texas woods. Samuel took her arm roughly. We're leaving. Now. Margaret fought, kicking and shouting, her voice shrill as she hurled insults and threats. But the hired men no longer supported her. They followed Samuel obediently, eager to be away from a situation that had turned far uglier than they expected. As their shouts faded into the trees, Michael lowered his rifle and turned to Emily. She stood frozen, tears cutting silent paths down her cheeks, not from fear now, but from overwhelming relief. Michael stepped forward and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. She won't harm you again, he said softly. I promise. Emily looked up at him, her voice breaking. Thank you for believing me, for protecting me. Michael's gaze softened. I'll always believe you. And in that moment, standing in the quiet clearing where truth had finally defeated cruelty, Emily felt something stronger than fear, stronger even than hope. She felt safe. Safe for the first time since Thomas died. Safe, not because she was hidden, but because someone had chosen to stand beside her. Someone who wouldn't walk away. In the days that followed the confrontation in the clearing, the air around the woods felt strangely lighter, as though a storm had finally passed. For the first time in months, Emily slept without waking in terror, no longer hearing Margaret's voice echoing through her nightmares. Yet she knew peace would not last unless justice was served. Michael knew it too. You shouldn't have to spend the rest of your life waiting for the next shadow. He told her one morning as he repaired a loose board on the cabin wall. We finish this now. With the letter Thomas had written and 2 reliable witnesses, Michael rode into town to speak with Judge Winslow, a stern but fair-minded man who had known the Carter family for years. Emily, though anxious, trusted Michael completely. Every time he left the cabin, he returned. Every time she feared abandonment, he reminded her that he wasn't going anywhere. When Michael returned from the courthouse 2 days later, she met him at the door, her hands instinctively resting on her belly. "Well?" she asked, breath held. Michael removed his hat, his expression steady but filled with restrained emotion. He listened, all of it, and he's taking it seriously. What will happen? He summoned Margaret and Samuel for questioning, and he wants to speak with you too. Emily's heart thudded painfully. She had avoided the town ever since the day Margaret cast her out. But this time, she wouldn't be walking into danger alone. She would be walking beside someone who believed in her. The courthouse felt colder than Emily remembered, with wide stone walls that echoed every whisper. When Judge Winslow called her forward, she steadied herself on the edge of the table, drawing strength from the knowledge that Michael was seated behind her. She told her story honestly, about the years of quiet cruelty, Thomas's sudden death, and the moment Margaret forced her into the darkness with nothing but a bundle of clothes. She spoke softly but clearly. Emily Carter had always been gentle, but grief and hardship had carved resilience into her voice. Judge Winslow listened with growing severity etched across his features. When Margaret and Samuel were questioned, the truth unraveled quickly. Margaret fumbled through excuses, grew defensive, shouted accusations, and finally contradicted her own statements. Samuel, visibly shaken, admitted he had suspected wrongdoing but had been too afraid of his wife's temper to investigate. The judge didn't need more. His verdict was swift. Margaret had falsified documents, manipulated family assets, and carried out an unlawful eviction with malicious intent. She was ordered to return all property wrongfully taken, pay significant damages to Emily, and face public censure for fraud and coercion. The Carter Ranch, now tarnished by scandal, would be liquidated to cover the debt. When Emily heard the ruling, she didn't feel triumph, just a deep, quiet release, like exhaling a breath she'd held for far too long. Margaret screamed her outrage, but no one listened anymore. Justice had found her, even in a place where women's voices were rarely heard. That evening, Michael and Emily rode back through the woods, bathed in the orange glow of a setting sun. Emily leaned back against the saddle, exhausted but strangely peaceful. When they reached the cabin clearing, she stopped and looked around. The small chimney, the repaired door, the warm lantern light glowing through the window. "This place saved my life," she whispered. Michael stepped closer. "You saved your life. The cabin just gave you a roof." Emily turned to him, her eyes softening. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "Not just until the baby comes. Longer, if you'd want that." A moment of silence followed, gentle, expectant. Michael's voice, when it came, trembled with sincerity. "I haven't wanted anything more in years." The words settled between them like a promise. Emily reached for his hand. He took it, hesitantly at first, then with steady warmth. Under the canopy of swaying pines, 2 wounded souls, one who had lost everything and one who had been cast aside, found a place to begin again.